Hi, welcome to Psychanooga. I'm your co-host, Bethany Cawthorn.
And I'm the other co-host, James Grant. We're here to discuss our interview we did with Dr. Arnold, which was on substance abuse.
And we suddenly somehow had research methods and the research methods lab together without ever knowing it.
And Dr. Arnold taught that research methods class. And we had no idea we were in the same class.
No, we were walking to Lupton one day and from Macaulay building, I think it was. And we were talking and we were like, oh yeah, I took research methods last semester. And you're like, what time did you take that? Who'd you take it with? And I'm like, Dr. Arnold at 9:25.
It's like, oh, me too. That's cool.
Yeah. And it turns out we were sitting in the same row, just on opposite sides of the classroom. I was on the left and you were on the right.
And then we also had the lab together. Trivia. What's the most immediately and physically dangerous substance? Not long term.
Fentanyl?
Immediate. No. What immediately does the most damage to you? It's going to be obvious when I say it, but I don't know if you'll be able to think of it.
Oxy?
You're saying them shorthand like you're a dealer. I got some oxy for you.
I got some Oxy.
It's sniffing paint or glue.
Really?
Yeah, because it goes straight to your brain.
Whoa.
We learned that in psychopathology. Dr. Les Curte.
Nice job.
Thank you.
Good job, James. You're smart and you remember things well.
If Dr. Curte teaches it, I remember it well. What was your favorite moment from the Dr. Arnold interview?
Probably where she was talking about how not everything is an addiction.
Yeah. Not the moment where we asked her what her favorite thing about the psychology department was. And
she was like, us. Oh, I actually forgot about that. But that was so sweet. That was so wholesome. She was like, y'all, seeing the students do stuff and be active. And I was like, oh, that's so touching.
Mm-hmm. She was very gracious and understanding because we had to reschedule her interview 3 times. Oh. She's a great professor.
Mm-hmm. She's really understanding.
She's very nice. Understanding. She somehow even made research methods entertaining.
Dr. Arnold is a professor for research methods and drugs and behavior. She does a lot of research and primarily to do with substance abuse and disorders and stuff. Could you just go ahead and tell us, who you are, what you do?
Yeah. So my background was originally developmental psychology. Always liked working with older adults and kind of knew that even as an undergrad. So my progression was kind of looking at chronic disease management and then moving from chronic disease management to substance use because I was finding that people managing diabetes were drinking a lot and smoking a lot, which is not great for blood glucose control. And so I tried to get back to the heart of the issue. And so trying to understand, at least from an alcohol perspective, what's going on, what's causing people to do this, even though they have chronic health conditions, right? And so that's where I kind of fell into more of the psychological factors related to substance use in older adults. Moving on to prescription medications when I had some more training at the University of Michigan in psychiatry. And so that's where I'm at today, doing more mental health and substance use types of research more broadly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what kind of research are you doing right now?
Right now, I am writing up some manuscripts for an intergenerational substance use study that I did. And so that was looking at college students, their parents, and their grandparents, and trying to understand how they were using alcohol, cannabis, and prescription medications. And to see how much they're doing it similarly, right? Are they drinking the same as their grandparents, as their parents, as whoever their guardians are? Also getting a sense of what they believe their parents are doing, what they think their grandparents are doing. Do they think their parents are drinking a lot less than their parents are reporting that they're drinking? Do they think their parents would approve of what they're doing? And vice versa. And been seeing some really interesting results with that. Currently, I have students working on cognitive types of projects, so understanding things like stereotype threat and attention with alcohol. And so trying to figure out how alcohol specifically can impact someone's stereotype threat, specifically ego threat, and how that can affect their attention and their performance on tasks. Kind of keeping in mind how alcohol can exacerbate some of these negative types of moods, especially thinking in terms of bar situations, right? Where people start getting real competitive with darts, and then sometimes a fight breaks out, right? And so what is potentially fueling that additional piece? And then looking a little bit more at maladaptive daydreaming and how that's related to adult adverse experiences.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So very interesting work. What kind of inspired you to like go into psychology in the first place? Like on the broader scheme, going to college?
I always share that psychology was not my first major. It was like my fifth. And I started off pre-vet and kind of bounced around. And psychology stuck with me the most. It made the most sense for me. It was intuitive, and I could see its applications. And the more I read about it, the more I loved it. I wanted to keep learning about it. And so, yeah, I just jumped in as soon as after I took intro, I was like, wow, this is really what I want to be doing. And then started volunteering in research labs and went from there.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
How long have you been working in the psych field?
Oh, boy. I don't know, I was like an undergrad. I graduated from college in 2010.
Okay. Right. Good amount of experience.
Yes.
There, yeah. How long have you been at UTC?
I have been here since 2020.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of work do you typically strive to do at UTC specifically? Like, what's your goal in your role at UTC?
My goal has largely been to get people involved in substance use research and understanding the implications, getting my students out into the community, seeing the real world implications. Because it's really easy for us to kind of sit up here and read all this research and say, we know that these are risk factors. We know that, people who think substance use is going to help them cope will use it more, right? But going out and actually talking to people who are experiencing addiction and people who are experiencing these things is very different. Talking to people working in the field is very different. So like at the drug court, what does that actually look like in real life, right? And so trying to bridge that gap between kind of this more almost ivory tower sort of thing with why it matters. And usually people get into this field because they want to help people, right? Mm-hmm. And so sometimes that gets lost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If students wanted to get more experience like that, what would be the first step for them? Where do you usually direct them?
There are a couple of different places that would be happy to have students. I know that Hamilton County Drug Court is always looking for interns. The mental health court as well. Really, if you can go to most substance use treatment places, they're looking for interns. They're looking for people that are passionate about it because, yeah, it's a huge field and there's a huge need.
So you mentioned Michigan. How did you go from Michigan to Chattanooga?
So Michigan was very research focused, and I wanted to do something more with students and more with mentoring and training. And so I felt that it made more sense for me to come down to a university that allowed me to work more directly with students.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So where are you from originally?
West Virginia.
Wow.
Oh, you've been all over the place.
Yeah.
Yeah, went from West Virginia to Penn State to Michigan and then down here.
Wow.
Okay.
That's quite
Lots of experience.
Reach, yeah. Where would you like to go from here? What are some of your goals in the future?
Currently, I've been trying to work a little more in the community to influence policy or at least have a say in policy. And so I think that's where I'm kind of moving now. Not completely into it, but I do very much want to see policy being informed by science, and that can sometimes fall by the wayside. And so, I don't know exactly where I fit in that, but definitely trying to keep in touch with people that are in policy.
So I know with my friends, we talk a lot about kind of the heritability of alcoholism. When you talked about your research, you also mentioned kind of
children's perspectives of their parents and their grandparents. Do you think that has more effect or equal or less effect than the heritability? Maybe like a supportive perception would kind of trump the heritability of it?
Yeah, it's very much a gene by environment sort of thing. So some people will grow up with parents that have substance use disorders, and they say, I'm absolutely never touching anything ever, and they don't. Right? There's some that do, but they can still do it moderately. And so some of it's going to be some of that heritability, some of it's going to be environment, and then there's just temperament within an individual and personality. And so some people are also just more prone to risk-taking. That's a common type of genetic factor too, however. And so my students always joke, and they got me a little sticker saying it depends, because that's what I'm always saying, is because it's hard to say for any given individual. Largely, you're not going to see one cause. If someone's in an environment that increases their risk for substance use, it's probably a couple of different factors. It might be their guardians, it might be trauma, it can be a combination of things. It could just be their own genetics, and maybe they're just the oddball in their family that has a substance use disorder.
What would you say is the best thing about the psych department here?
Probably involvement of you guys. You guys are like really, really, I was like super excited when I was first interviewing you. I was really excited to see about like the journal, the undergrad journal and whatnot, and like hearing about the podcast. I'm like, that's so awesome that you guys are like doing so much with it. And so, yeah, I think you guys have been really my favorite part.
Oh, thank you.
That's sweet. What's your favorite part of just the field of psychology in general?
That you can do anything with it. And so with psychology, it touches every part, anything that any type of behavior is related to. Can't even just say human behavior, right? So animal behavior still falls technically under psychology. And so you can do anything with it. It's just a matter of figuring out your own space within it and what's important to you. And I like that there's not just one answer for things. I mean, that's kind of what fuels my interest.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed talking to different people in this psych department, whether it's students or professors, is there is a big, broad thing. Like, there's no one specific thing that you're going to do. Like, if you go to dental school, you're going to be a dentist, you know? Like, if you're in psychology, you can be so many things. So with research in general, like, why do you think it is so important to do research and conduct those experiments and go further than just creating theories?
I think the point of research is to help, right? Whether it's animals, whether it's people, society as a whole. And so I think it's important for us to be able to say that this research means something. We're dedicating these funds, we're dedicating this time to something. It can be varying degrees. And so I don't discount any type of research, basic, anything like that. It all goes somewhere. But as long as we keep that in mind and don't just keep it kind of on a shelf as a theory, where it's nice for discussions, but it doesn't necessarily help anything. And I think that's really what's important to keep in mind, is remembering that as a society we're trying to help each other in varying ways, and some of us are just doing it research-wise.
Can you tell us a little bit about some of the classes that you teach at UTC?
Primarily, I've been teaching research methods. You're in my class, I believe.
I was.
Yes.
So was Bethany, actually.
Oh, yeah, you look super familiar. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure you're in my class, too. Drugs and behavior, so I've been teaching that this semester. And so that's been really cool. Kind of make my students go out and interact with the community to learn more about overdose awareness and whatnot. What I've found that is a lot of people are really interested in it and think it's really important because substance use touches everything.
Yeah, what would you say is your favorite thing to teach?
Probably drugs and behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you going to be doing that in the fall?
Yes. Okay. Yes, I will.
All right, I'll remember that.
So when you say you send your students out into the community, how so? Like, what do they do?
So one of the things I have them do is the Hamilton County Coalition has a training for overdose awareness. So learning to basically administer Narcan, though theirs is specifically the nasal version. And so Narcan is what helps basically reverse an overdose for opioids. Right? So that's something that everyone really should know how to do. The second thing is making them have some other type of experience. And so for this class, I'm having them either go to some AA meetings or NA meetings, or Alcohol Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous, going to 2 of those meetings, sitting in, and people always think it's really daunting, but those groups of people are super welcoming. They're super happy to be there, especially if you say you're a student and you're trying to learn more about their experiences. And people found it really helpful to get a better perspective of who all can become addicted, which is everyone. Another option they have is to kind of, not the exact addiction experience, but similar, where they have to basically be addicted to ice. Right? And so for that, they have to, anytime they want to use ice, they have to do it in a manner that is how someone would do it with addiction, right? No one can see you do it. You have to make sure you're doing it every few hours or using it every few hours. You know, having to hide it is one of the biggest things, having to lie whether or not you got it. And people have found that helpful too, and it was really stressful for them, but gave them some good insight to how time intensive and how time consuming it can be.
Yeah, that's such an interesting little kind of procedure to have them do, like pretend you're an addict and like make it. Yeah, that's cool. That's really cool. You might see me and James in that class next time.
Yeah,
like that sounds really neat.
This is just pure curiosity. Have you ever like done any group, not necessarily therapy, but like group setting stuff, or?
Yeah, so I've been in those settings.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was just curious.
Yeah.
Me and a friend of mine, one summer we would go around and watch like AA meetings and other anonymous meetings.
Yeah.
Academically, and it's diverse in the sense that like they're all different ages, all different people, and they're all so supportive and open about it because they really believe in that system that they have, and that they can help each other. It's a really good. I would encourage anyone to go, even just listen as a student.
Yeah, having community is very important. Knowing that you have social support is a huge factor, even if it's just one other person you can talk to, which is why they have that concept of a sponsor. So someone that you can tell everything to, will be non-judgmental about it because they understand the experience.
Because even if you have a community outside of that, that shame you have kind of keeps you from having a community that knows about all that. So that community really helps.
Yeah, then, you know, that community that understands what you're going through too. Yeah. What would you say, like, in your experience with substance abuse research, what would you say is like one of the best forms of support for people struggling with substance abuse?
That's a hard question because sometimes people become incredibly isolated because of their substance use. And, you know, they'll have family members, friends that just cut off contact with them. And, you know, that's their right, but also does leave them without support once they are sober. And so then in that case, AA, NA is going to be a great place for them. But even with people who still have friends and family that understand, again, if they don't understand it, if they haven't experienced it, they're probably not sharing everything, that shameful thing that they've done with their family. They're trying to just share the success part with them. And so I think having a diverse social support system is important. So having some people that knew you all your life, support you, love you regardless, but also someone who's like, I've seen and done whatever shameful things that we both feel guilty about, or I've felt guilty about before, and being able to have those candid conversations. And it can be a peer, because so there's peer specialists too that you can get certified in Tennessee for mental health and substance use. But you having a peer or having a counselor, a therapist, something, like some multi-pronged, basically, approach to social support. That way, because someone is not going to be able to support you in all parts of your life, and that's true for anyone even without addiction, right? You go to some friends and family for some things and other friends and family for others.
Mm-hmm. What would you say is like one form of addiction that people don't typically think about?
I feel like awareness of addiction is a lot better now. Mm-hmm. However, people want to say everything's an addiction. That's where that's more of the issue more than anything else. And not keeping in mind that addiction means something very specific. It's not just I can't stop scrolling on social media. Mm-hmm. It's that I am displacing everything in my life doing this activity. And so if you're not eating because you're scrolling on social media, if you're not sleeping, if you're spending all your time thinking about it when you're not on it, then we're going to start talking about it being an addiction, because it has to do with your social functioning too. Mm. What else is going on in your life? If nothing is disrupted, then it's largely not an addiction.
That's a very good point. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So your research doesn't necessarily focus on this, but if any role, would you say that repression plays a role in addiction?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have a follow-up question?
Do you want to elaborate more on how it does?
In what way?
Yeah.
There's a couple of different mechanisms that's happening. Stress is probably the simplest way to sum all that up. Yeah. And so basically, cumulative stress over time, depending on a specific individual, their identities, that sort of thing.
Okay.
Yeah. What kind of circumstances or life events would you say tend to create the most risk for substance abuse disorder forming?
One thing to keep in mind is generally if someone's experiencing something traumatic, it's not just one thing. Mm-hmm. And so they're generally in situations that are resulting in multiple. Even when someone does just experience one, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to result in a substance use disorder. It might result in PTSD, which may or may not also be linked to substance use disorder. And so it's no way to say that it's going to be one specific instance. Neglect, for example. Children being neglected, it's just as traumatic as someone who's been physically assaulted because they were without for years, whether it's any interaction with their parents, maybe it's no consistent food, maybe they went out without shoes for a lot. Not so much a specific type of trauma, so much as sometimes duration, where you were at developmentally, could you escape it? These controllability types of factors too.
Maybe a good wrap-up question would be if you know someone who is struggling with an addiction, what's the best way to approach that while also keeping yourself, maybe safe isn't the right word, but kind of not fall into it or not get into despair about it?
With that, it can be really difficult because for someone to get help and get treatment, they have to be open to it. Mm-hmm. As much as we want to say we just need to do an intervention on them, that's not necessarily successful. Mm-hmm. It's not successful the majority of the time unless that person's already in the mindset of maybe I should make these changes. Mm-hmm. They're not there. So all you can do is kind of try to support them, help them be safe, but keeping yourself safe too. Talking to them about it as much as you can without them potentially getting agitated, because you also don't want them to cut you off because they feel like you're pushing, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if you are trying to keep an eye out on them. And so, of course, it depends on where they are in their stage.
Yeah. That is a really tricky subject. I mean, there's no one right way or one good way, I would say, to go about substance abuse. But
yeah, even when people are just drinking heavily, right? Yeah. When do you start talking to them about that? Do you feel comfortable doing it? And so I got interested because people don't want to talk to their grandparents or their older parents about it, right? Mm-hmm. They're retired. They can do what they want. Mm-hmm. And so it doesn't get easier with age. It doesn't get easier with relationship.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so if you are in that place of addiction, would you say a good first step would be finding something like a anonymous group so that you have that first step of people who have been through that and can accept you for that?
I think that can be helpful, but again, you're going to have to be at the stage where you even want to hear it and know that at least there is somewhat of a problem. Because if you're saying this isn't a problem, then it's, I'm not like any of these people anyway. They don't know what's going on. I'm completely different. Once there's some acknowledgement, generally this happens after there's some consequences, then that's when people are a little more open to talking to individuals within those groups.
It depends.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Arnold,
Of course.
for talking to us and meeting with us today. This has been a very insightful conversation, and things that aren't always discussed as much as they probably should be, because they do affect a lot of people. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you guys.
What would you say is like something like in the realm of substance abuse? Like, how have you seen it portrayed throughout your life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I feel like society romanticizes it a lot.
Especially in like shows like of Euphoria,
And
for
it depends
instance.
on what it is. Like, cool guys smoking a cigarette is one thing.
Right.
But like also like shows like Euphoria, it's kind of like when 13 Reasons Why came out. There's big debate of like if it was romanticizing suicide. And it's like suicide wasn't a good thing in the show. But it's like just putting it out there on that format kind of glorifies it a little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, I haven't seen Euphoria, so I can't really say, for instance, but I have seen some of 13 Reasons Why, anyways, the first 2 seasons.
I haven't seen either.
And I do know that, like, yeah, they definitely, like, obviously suicide was bad in it, and they even showed, Hannah, like, dying and how she died and all of that. And obviously it was bad, and they defined exactly why and how it was bad, but at the same time, I remember there being a lot of controversy where people were like, this is over glorifying it too much, and I remember there being a couple of people who had like killed themselves, and they were
And they like left
blaming
their
it
13
on
reasons.
13 Reasons Why.
Well, it's like if you identify with that character and you relate with them, and then they see them take that as a solution to their problems, that can create issues.
Right. And I remember, like, even in school, like, I remember meeting this one girl at a camp that I went to one time where she was saying that, like, her parents wouldn't let her watch 13 Reasons Why because she had some, like, history with depression and suicidal thoughts, and they were just worried that she would kind of start to see herself in Hannah too much, and then find that, oh, well, that was the right solution.
Yeah.
So in that sense, I can see where that could be problematic,
Yeah.
and that comes into play a lot with substance abuse too, especially with, how in a lot of shows and stuff, you see somebody who struggles with an addiction, but then maybe they get help and they have good support system or whatever, and that helps them get through it, and it's like a success story, and you see that and we're like, well, it's not that bad. But not everybody has that. And you can't say that everyone is going to react to an addiction in the same way, or they're going to have the same kind of support, or they're going to be able to get through it the same way. A lot of people struggle with that, and that really affects their family and their friends and their jobs and where they live and, what they do. And really, basically their quality of life is really affected, and you don't see that as much. So,
Or like one of the most well-regarded shows of all time, Breaking Bad, about cooking meth.
yeah,
One of the main characters is a meth addict, and he does get clean eventually, and there is sort of a good story there, but just the normalizing of it, and in some senses the glorifying of it. But Breaking Bad does do a good job of villainizing it, but still just putting it out there for people to see.
yeah, and it's the kind of thing, like, it's good to be aware of that stuff. It's good to know, like, hey, this is the kind of impact these things can have on your life, and it can really show, like, why you shouldn't do that stuff. But at the same time, there comes that extra risk of people doing it because they've seen it there. I hope everybody had a great
good
spring break.
Send us your psychoanalyses of your spring break.
And let us know how those went for a possible feature on our newest podcast.
I've been your co-host, James Grant.
And I've been your other co-host, Bethany Cawthorn. Thank
Who's
you.
responsible for my therapy now?
I am. Thank you so much for listening.